Let's quickly talk to Benji in Alabama. Benji, you maybe are pushing back on the idea that some people believe the Bible trumps other civil rights. Do I have that correct?
Yeah, yeah. Well, it kind of falls back on the previous call too.
I think the previous caller would say that the Bible trumps what other folks or what our culture broadly would agree are civil rights.
Yeah, I kind of went into that by accident, actually. I went to church and me and someone got to talking and they mentioned something. And then I said, well, if the government is wrong, then the people have a right to overthrow the government. It's even in the Constitution itself. And actually, there's some founding fathers, I can't remember exactly, I believe John Hancock is one of them, possibly, that was atheist, that they didn't believe
it. Sure. A great number of the founding fathers were atheists or deists or these other stripes. We don't necessarily need to get lost into the original intent of the founders of America because they are not the arbiters of what government should be. They're just a bunch of people who decided what this government might look like, at least at the very beginning. Wow. And while we can honor that contribution and be very appreciative for it, I think we can also have the right to improve upon it and push back on parts of it. But regardless, Benji, let me ask you this in a more straightforward way. Do you believe, or would you agree, that at least some Christians or some people who call themselves Christians would say that the Bible is more important or that it overrides the civil rights of others?
Unfortunately, I know for a fact that there's a good majority that do, even though it doesn't.
When you say even though it doesn't, where are you getting that from, or what does it mean to disagree? Because I certainly am on your side here. I'm sorry, I know the framing here is a little tricky. I agree that the Bible is not more important than the civil rights that we have sort of culturally agreed upon. But where do you come to that from?
Well, several places. I mean, if the Bible was absolute, which I don't believe in absolute certainty of anything or any of that anyway, but let's just say, for the sake of argument, that the Bible did trump the civil rights or whatever, then the world would be a completely different place than it is. Also, this idea that a 2,000 roughly year old book that had ideas in it from people that barely even knew half of anything really that we know now, it just doesn't make any sense. And then the Christians or whatever, I mean, I'm not going to go into all of them. I mean, I'm not going to try to stroke with a general brush here, but that's kind of what it is that a lot of Christians, or the people that would call themselves Christians, despite their different beliefs amongst one another, might agree and say, oh, well, the Bible is absolute word of God, and so it trumps everything. And that, to me, is completely absurd and stupid, because we live in the here and now, and a lot of stuff that matters to people is actually subjective. There is not really any objective material thing that matters absolutely to people anyway, because everything's going to turn to dust and people die and stuff changes. So there's not really anything that remains constant throughout someone's life. I can speak from that on experience. And everything changes after a while. Society changes, norms change, rules change, laws change, all of it. And stuff that I still see as acceptable 40, 50 years ago, people might see as odd or strange or whatever, because people change with the times. I don't, but other people do.
Now, to steelman their position a little, I would say, well, if something is divinely inspired and perfect, then it doesn't need to change. It was perfect at the time it was written. It will be perfect for all eternity. God is eternal. God is perfect. Again, I don't agree with this, but I can imagine the counter-argument. What Christy, I think, was hoping to get, and I think you did explain it quite well, is that it's evident from the fact that things change over time, that norms change, and and we accept those changes in norms. Are you saying that's one of the reasons why you don't feel that the Bible overrides?
Well, that's definitely one of the main ones, because I mean, if we was going off Bible laws here, I mean, you would be stoned for having a job on a Sunday. You would be, the people that live with
possibly eaten by bears for not having as much hair. Like I definitely get it, and I agree that we can't use the Bible as this like perfect document. Benji, you and I have had that conversation before, and it does kind of beg the question of this paradox of if the Bible was written by a God and that document is not endless or timeless, or does eventually change, does that God change, or what does any of this even mean? Can we have a imperfect document created by a perfect eternal being?
Well, see, what I would argue on that too, I mean, I don't know if any Christians take this view or not, but it literally says it in the Bible anyway, that God is actually changing. He's not unchanging, because if you remember in the book of Genesis, and there's several actual accounts of Genesis, there's not just one version, there's several, but in one of them, when he flooded the earth, he dreaded making humans in the first place. So it's obvious that God does actually change his mind. In fact, he changes his mind several times throughout the Bible. And then people are like, oh, well, he doesn't change anything. Everything's predestined. Like today, the preacher guy was saying that God knows all, sees all, knows everything. And that gets into the argument that Matt Dillahunty and several of y'all have made in the past, that if God knows everything, then he knows all of the bad stuff that's going to happen. He knows everyone that's going to hell. He knows all of the bad that will ever happen.
It's why the Epicurean dilemma works the way the problem of evil works like that, and the problem of divine hiddenness. Like we're well aware of the contradictions in the Bible, and the fact that it also says in the Bible that he is unchanging, and perfect. I'm fairly certain. Again, I'd have to.
He regretted making humans after he made them and had to flood the earth.
And we've pointed this out to believers, and that's why apologetics exists as a field to explain away these contradictions in and logical flaws.
What would the opposite of an apologist be? Because I'm very good at the opposite of that. Well, I'm kind of good on
anti-apologetics. Is that kind of what you're meaning?
Yeah, what would the opposite of apologetics be? Because I'd be a really good person for that.
Well, I'd say skepticism, because apologetics is explaining contradiction, whereas a skeptic will want to root it out. Like we want consistency and rationality removed and identified and called out, rather than excused and painted over. But anti-apologetics is the actual term. It's just we will counter these arguments because they are usually
that part of debate
dishonest
as well. Whenever you're doing debate classes and stuff, because I used to do debates, and you would have somebody that would prove their resolve. Like you would pose a Tristan, and then you would try to prove it wrong. Like they would try to prove it right, then your job was to prove them wrong based on what they say, and kind of turn it and use it against them. And so I'm pretty good at that. But
well, fair enough. I mean, I at the very least, I appreciate the back and forth, the rigor, so to speak, of trying to justify and understand these things. I don't mean to overly reference the previous call, but it really challenges me when I meet somebody who has a belief system that is really opposed to my own, and whose values and beliefs are causing harm to people that I care about. But at least there is a mutual sort of respect and a willingness to work together and to try and understand each other, to find common ground. but I lose my patience, kind of the way I did on the last call, when somebody doesn't even know what they're talking about because they haven't gone through that rigor and through that process of trying to work through some of the seeming contradictions or trying to be skeptical and push back against some of these things. So, Benji, at the very least, for whatever you and I do or don't agree on, I appreciate your willingness to ask these questions and to be curious and to push back, because as we started with, there certainly are people who believe that the Bible on its own merit should trump our civil rights. And that breaks my heart.
Yeah, I do know several contradictions in the Bible. In fact, I talk to Christians on it all the time, but they just stonewall and ignore me and kind of bust it up the rug.
Well, let me ask you this.
I don't know if that's because they don't want to face it, or.
Well, let me ask you this then, Benji. You mentioned debate, and you mentioned it in the sort of classical form of here is the point, here is the debater for, and here's the debater against. Do you believe that is a useful format to come to consensus on a point?
Well, yeah. I mean, if you listen to one side of something and then you point out the flaws to what that one side says, you can. Sometimes it depends on if they're willing to concede or not, but usually you can come to some kind of middle ground.
Yeah.
Now, I noticed with the last caller that wasn't possible, but usually people that use their brain. If you say, for example, that slavery is okay, which believe me, I've seen several videos of that. That and I was.
I remember having a conversation with you about that, Benji, a while ago. But yeah, so.
But if you say slavery is okay, and then you have someone else that points out the problems with slavery, usually those people can come to some kind of a middle ground and say, well, slavery was bad with this and this and this and this.
Hopefully so.
And maybe it was good for the economy, like me and you talked about several years ago. And you actually brought up your ancestors, and all, and I remember all of that, by the way, just off memory. But and then but we came to a consensus. We came to kind of a middle ground, and
we did.
Like, well, but slavery helped the economy, but it still wasn't good for society.
Yeah. So arguing a point of that nature, but we were, that wasn't a classical debate. It wasn't that we had been set the task slavery is good, actually, yay or nay. It was that you at the time seemed to have a belief that it was justified in the past, and I disagreed with that belief. And we had more of a conversation. And what I'm saying is that being good at debates, while it's an interesting intellectual exercise and something that I quite enjoy, and it's quite enjoyable to watch as well, I think it has become it can be too adversarial. If we actually want to concentrate on what is right rather than who is right and divorce our egos from the process, I think we can better sort of move forward towards actually coming to some kind of consensus or compromise. There are many things that I've had to compromise over the past few years, especially living in the US. I've had to think about certain things that I held very specific beliefs on and still hold beliefs on and idealize, but I'm willing to compromise on to a certain extent. And I think that the fact that those who have nefarious means, those people who thrive on our division, who want us at each other's throats, because if we're not at their our throats, we'll be at theirs, want us to drive that wedge in. It's why things like that format where they have 20 people around one person, and it's all circus, right?
I've seen those, yeah.
Right, and so what we're hoping to do, and what I would encourage you to do, is to not make it like I have the right and I'm going to make you see it. It's that I want to know what you think and what you feel. I want to understand you, and then if there are parts of that I disagree with, I will present to you why I disagree with them, along with evidences as to why I disagree with them. And that's why the conversation we had before was effective. That's what I'd recommend to you, Benji.
But a lot of times, right? But a lot of times people don't listen to that side of the story. They, like they did with me today, they just kind of sweep it under the rug and just believe what they want to believe.
Well, it's also
I would say that the standard setting for debates, whether it's the way that Matt Dillahunty does it, where he hears kind of one side of it and then he tears it down step by step, which I don't know if he's still doing debates or not, or how somebody would call in like this show and then they would say, y'all would say, well, what do you believe, and then why do you believe it, and that kind of thing, and you would kind of go step by step that way. There's been several accounts in human history of war and hurting people, destroying things and everything, especially in the Crusades. And that was one of the things that just came right up to me during the last call when the guy said, "Oh, well, name an example where this actually hurt."
And we can. I think we're straying, Benji. Sorry, I don't mean to jump in because we are straying a little bit, I think, from the point. And I'm going to kick this back over to Christy in just a moment, but I want to make this point real quick: is that debate as a format has its place, but when we're trying to actually come to consensus, there are certain things in my mind, and again, this is what we were talking about earlier: universalisms, absolutes. There are certain things that are not up for debate. In my mind, human rights are not a subject that I can debate, and that's what causes a lot of friction. Especially, and again, don't want to get too much into it, but in politics, I can debate certain policies and things like that with people who may have a different political opinion to me, in the same way that I can debate epistemology around the existence of Christ, or the divinity of Christ, or any of that. But when it starts coming down to where the rubber hits the road and a belief is in contradiction to a generally accepted human right, and that to not have access to that human right causes demonstrable, provable harm, there is no debate to be had. Case in point, slavery. There's no debate on that.
Yeah.
Okay? So...
Yeah. The most I could do on that subject with you was just kind of point out the economic benefit, and that was the only benefit there even was, honestly, because it was horrible for everyone involved.
And we shot it down thoroughly. But what do you think, Christy? Do you think that it's sensible to say that there are certain things that are just not up for debate?
Yeah, I ultimately do, and I think that is where the wisdom of all of this lies. We started off this whole episode by sort of asking the question, where do we draw those hard lines? When do we say that we cannot tolerate this level of intolerance, while also hoping to build bridges? And I don't think that there is for lack of a better word, a correct answer to that question. I don't know that there are hard and fast rules that we could philosophically derive and say that this is the point at which. But I do think that we need to be willing to draw those lines from time to time, or at least draw them for ourselves in any particular moment, because people like our previous caller do exist who would say that we can take away certain what I would express as inalienable human rights. And that tension is a problem. That tension is something we have to be mindful of. So Benji, I hope that we can at the very least be rigorous in these things and asking these kinds of questions. And I don't know that there is a hard and fast place that we can draw the line. Anything else that you want to add before we wrap up for the day?
Yeah, so in some of my calls, I watch some of my old videos on YouTube where I call in, and I would saw some of the comments, and there's been people repeatedly, I don't know if they're trolls or not, but they would sit there and say, oh, well, either I have a point, or people would sit there and say that I'm a lunatic who just calls in every day or every Sunday or whatever, and then, waste time. But I bring up very good points a lot of the time, unless I just can't think of anything else.
I don't mean to rain on your parade there, Benji. There was one more point I wanted to make, and that is a great little vector for me to do it. One, how good your points are not for you to decide. That's for the people watching them and judging them to decide. And secondly, if you are engaging in these kinds of conversations to feel the thrill of being right and having intellectual, perceived intellectual superiority over someone else, yes, that can feel very good, but it is essentially hollow. and it can be counterproductive. Ask me how I know. So, like I said, it behooves us to take our egos out of this fight. The mission is bigger than the man. So I would encourage you, and this is my final word on it, to, if you want to get involved in these conversations, do it for the right reasons. Not to make yourself feel big or good or clever, but because a point needs to be made.
Do it for that. I don't really do it from the ego. I do it to help, I do it to teach, also to spread knowledge, kind of like what y'all do pretty much with the show. You spread knowledge to other people that might not know about the Bible, or point out the problems with it, or because a lot of the stuff that y'all bring up isn't never brought up to the general, Christian, the person that goes to church. They're not going to hear about fallacies or the problems with what's in the Bible, because the preacher's job is just sitting there reading the Bible as if it's true, and so the people that's in the pews, they don't take the time to question it, or, ask, well, why is this relevant, or how would this make other people feel? They don't never take the time to do any of that.
No, all fair to say. So I appreciate you raising these questions again, engaging in that rigor, being skeptical about what we believe, being willing to challenge ourselves and one another in a respectful way to hopefully derive at something resembling truth. We appreciate your time and your call today, Benji, and I hope you have a great weekend.
I do have one other message for Jamie. Have you tried looking into cybernetic eyes to replace the ones that are damaged?
That's a whole kettle of fish that we don't have time to get into. But the fact that I don't want my eyes to be owned by someone else, and I don't want to have to pay a license for them to work. I would say in response to that, you might want to Google stories of support ending for medical implants, because it's happened before and it ain't great. So I
believe I saw that episode of Black Mirror. It kept me up at night.
Yeah.
With that fascinating thought, Benji, I hope you have a wonderful weekend. So Jamie, I don't want to dive too much deeper into much of anything, but before we do walk out, I wanted to at least take a moment and acknowledge your experience of Benji there, and what it's like to have somebody sort of assume certain things about you or about your interests or your desires when it comes to any disabilities or anything else.
I will always try, especially now, to be because I'm trying to hold myself to intellectual and emotional honesty as best as I can. I'm not perfect, far from it, but I will always ascribe to actual curiosity and ignorance, innocent ignorance, anything that is said that might potentially offend me. One of the things that actually annoys me most is when people are hair trigger about their their sort of minority status, where any kind of something that could be slightly construed as offensive sets someone off into righteous indignation, because you're not correcting, you're not teaching, you're not informing, you're just spewing, you're just using this person as a verbal punching bag at this point. So when someone makes an assumption as to I'd be interested in like cyber eyes and stuff, that is a conversation I'd be willing to have. And again, there are nuances around that. And I'd be happy to educate. I don't take that kind of sentiment as, it might sound a little bit condescending, like, hey, you person who has lived this life your entire life and has probably thought about all of these things, I'm gonna suggest this thing to you just in case.
As if it had never occurred to you.
As if it never occurred to me to think about it or investigate it. I think that avoiding being that person is something that we should all strive to do, because, again, I haven't lived the life a lot of people have lived. Other than my disability, I have no other minority status. I am a straight, cis, white male from a wealthy Western country. I am educated. I am I'm not rich, but I'm comfortable enough. I have many privileges and advantages, right? I would never deign to think I could know what it's like to be some people, to live some people's lives, or think I have some solution for them that they haven't already thought of. But if I think of something that I think might be useful, and I am talking to someone, just a little bit of reframing might help. Don't say, have you thought about this? Say, I thought about this. Could you tell me what you think about that? Because it's not, I think you were too, like saying, I don't think you've thought about this. It's saying, I'm going to assume you know yourself well enough to have considered this. I'd like to know more about what you think about
more
this
about
topic.
the considerations.
Can you fill me in on your standpoint on it? So frame it from an I think this, I've thought of this, and I'd like to know what you think of it, rather than have you thought about it. That would be my advice.
Yeah. Well, fair enough. I just appreciate you taking a moment to kind of walk us through that experience a little bit.